Millionaire thought he was wedding an ugly woman in arranged marriage, but he was stunned when— Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The wedding hall was decorated with crystal chandeliers and fresh white roses, a picture of perfection that should have belonged to a fairy tale. Yet, inside that grand hall, whispers slithered through the crowd like venom. Why her? How could the Donovan heir be forced to marry that ugly woman? Guests leaned close to one another, lips curling with mockery, eyes darting toward the bride who stood trembling under the weight of their judgment. Amelia wore a modest gown, not a glamorous designer dress. Her veil hid most of her face, but not enough to conceal the scars of insecurity that society had branded upon her. She was not the kind of woman anyone expected to marry a millionaire. She was ordinary, plain, the daughter of a struggling farmer deep in the Midwest, forced into this union to save her family from crushing debt. At the other end of the aisle stood Ethan Donovan, heir to a billion-dollar construction empire. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit fit him like a second skin, yet his eyes were cold. He did not smile, not even when the music swelled. To him, this was not romance. It was business. His parents had pushed him into this arranged marriage to quiet rumors and strengthen family alliances. He had agreed, but only with one condition. It would be a contract marriage. As Amelia walked down the aisle, Ethan's jaw tightened. He told himself this was just 1 year of inconvenience, nothing more. He could endure a year of being tied to a woman he did not choose. He thought she was beneath him, unworthy of his name. The contract they had signed ensured that, at the end of 12 months, both would go their separate ways, no emotions involved. But Amelia's heart was heavy. She was not marrying for love, she knew that. She was marrying to save her parents from losing their farm. She had overheard her father's late-night phone calls with the bank, his desperate pleas. When Ethan's family offered the proposal, she accepted without hesitation. To her, sacrifice was survival. If enduring humiliation and whispers of being the ugly bride could save her family, then so be it. As the officiant began the vows, Ethan barely looked at her. His thoughts were elsewhere, calculating deals and timelines, not realizing that the woman standing beside him had a strength he had yet to witness. Amelia's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she said, "I do." It was the only part of this entire spectacle that carried truth. She meant it, not because of love, but because of duty. When Ethan repeated the words, his voice was cold and clipped, as though the vows were another business transaction. The guests clapped, though many smirked behind their champagne glasses. And just like that, a millionaire had married a woman everyone mocked, under a contract that promised no real affection. But what Ethan did not know was that this very arrangement, born from arrogance and disdain, would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about beauty, worth, and love. Because in the quiet strength of the woman he dismissed as ugly lay the power to stun him in ways he never imagined. The celebration after the wedding was brief, almost mechanical. Ethan made polite gestures for the sake of appearances, shaking hands with investors and exchanging shallow words with relatives, but his eyes never lingered on Amelia. She sat quietly at the corner of the long banquet table, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She looked like a guest at her own wedding, not a bride. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the staff had cleared away the last of the champagne glasses, Ethan and Amelia were driven to the Donovan estate. The mansion loomed like a fortress, its marble columns and sprawling gardens a silent reminder of the world she had just entered. The moment the car door shut behind them, Ethan's tone changed. "Let us make something clear," he said, his voice low but firm as they entered the grand foyer. "This is not a real marriage. You will live here, but you will stay out of my way. We will keep up appearances for the public and for my parents. But once the year is over, you will leave. That is what you signed for." Amelia's chest tightened, but she nodded. She had known this from the beginning. The contract spelled everything out. No expectations of intimacy, no claims to his fortune, no rights to interfere with his business. For 12 months, she would play the role of Mrs. Donovan, and in return, her family would be spared financial ruin. "Yes," she answered softly, her voice steady though her heart trembled. "I understand." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then turned and walked toward the staircase. "Good. Your room is down the east wing. My staff will show you the way. Remember, this is temporary. Do not mistake formality for affection." Those words stung, but Amelia kept her composure. She had endured worse from strangers her entire life. Being labeled ugly, unwanted, and unworthy had become a cruel chorus in her ears. Yet here, in this vast house, with its polished floors and glittering chandeliers, the weight of loneliness pressed harder than ever. That night, lying awake in her new bedroom, Amelia pulled out a small leather sketchbook she had hidden inside her luggage. It was worn, the edges frayed, its pages filled with drawings that revealed more about her than words ever could. She traced the lines of her last sketch, a field of wheat swaying under the golden sun, and allowed herself a single tear. Meanwhile, in his private study, Ethan poured himself a glass of bourbon. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the flickering fire in the hearth. He told himself this arrangement was nothing more than duty, a shield against family pressure. But for a brief second, he thought of the woman across the hall. There was something unsettling about the way she had looked at him, not with desperation, not with ambition, but with quiet resolve. The days that followed settled into a cold rhythm. They ate breakfast at the same table but exchanged only a handful of words. Staff members whispered about the strange marriage, about the bride who seemed invisible in the Donovan estate. When society friends visited, Ethan played the role of the devoted husband. But as soon as the doors closed, silence reclaimed the air. Yet Amelia did not crumble. She rose early every morning, tending to small corners of the house the staff overlooked, sketching quietly by the garden when no one watched. She did not fight for Ethan's attention, nor did she beg for kindness. Instead, she carried herself with a dignity that slowly began to unsettle him. One evening, as they crossed paths in the hall, he noticed her carrying that same leather sketchbook. He almost asked about it but stopped himself. He had built walls too high to allow curiosity. Still, the image lingered in his mind, as though that simple book held a secret he was not ready to face. The contract was clear, the boundaries sharp, but beneath the polished surface of their arrangement, something unseen had begun to shift, like the first crack in a wall that had long seemed unbreakable. The first weeks of their marriage felt more like a silent duel than a shared life. The Donovan mansion was vast enough that Ethan and Amelia could avoid each other almost entirely, but fate ensured that they crossed paths in the most ordinary moments at the breakfast table, in the corridor, or during family dinners where appearances had to be maintained. At breakfast, Ethan sat at the head of the long mahogany table, scrolling through his phone or reviewing documents while sipping black coffee. Amelia sat several seats away, quietly eating her toast and eggs. When she tried to start polite conversation, asking about his day or commenting on the weather, he barely acknowledged her, answering with clipped words or silence. The staff noticed. Whispers floated through the hallways. She tries, but he does not even look at her. Why would he, when he never wanted her in the first place? The gossip stung, but Amelia refused to let it show. She focused on keeping her posture straight, her words kind, and her dignity intact. One evening, Ethan returned home later than usual, his tie loosened, and his expression hardened from a long day at the company. As he entered the dining room, Amelia stood, waiting for him to join her before eating. It was a simple courtesy, something her parents had taught her. Ethan frowned. "You do not need to wait for me," he said coldly, sitting down. "This is not a real marriage. You do not have to act like it island." "Oh?" Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork, but her voice remained calm. "I know what this is, Ethan, but respect costs nothing." For the first time, his eyes flicked toward her, studying her expression. There was no anger, no bitterness, only quiet strength. He looked away quickly, unwilling to admit that her words had unsettled him. Outside of the mansion, Amelia's position was no easier. When she accompanied Ethan to social gatherings, she became the target of cutting remarks and fake smiles. At a charity gala, A group of elegantly dressed women whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Can you believe this is Mrs. Donovan?" one sneered. "With all the beautiful women in the city, this is who he married?" Amelia felt her cheeks burn, but she lifted her chin and smiled politely, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. Ethan, standing only a few feet away, heard every word. He said nothing. His silence was another kind of wound, one that cut deeper than the whispers. Back at home, the quiet tension grew heavier. Ethan noticed the way Amelia disappeared into the gardens after such events, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. He told himself it was none of his concern, yet his gaze often lingered through the window, watching her pencil move across the page, her face calm in a way it never was inside the house. Conflict also flared within the Donovan household. Ethan's mother, a woman of sharp tongue and colder heart, treated Amelia like an unworthy intruder. She criticized her clothes, her posture, even the way she spoke. "A Donovan bride should shine," she sneered one afternoon. "But you look like a shadow." Oh. Amelia did not answer back. She simply lowered her eyes, holding her dignity like a shield. Later that night, she wrote in her sketchbook, her lines darker, her strokes sharper, pouring her pain into art no one else would see. Ethan began to notice the pattern. She never defended herself, never lashed out. She absorbed every cruel word with a silence that spoke louder than anger. And though he had once believed her to be weak, he started to wonder if this quiet endurance was a form of strength he had never recognized. Still, he said nothing. He maintained his distance, clinging to the boundaries of their contract. But the truth was undeniable. The so-called ugly woman he had dismissed was slowly, quietly, unsettling the walls he had built around his heart. It happened on a rainy evening in late autumn. The Donovan mansion was quiet, the storm outside rattling the tall windows. Ethan had just returned from a long board meeting, his head pounding from hours of debate. As he walked past the library, he noticed a soft glow of light and paused. Inside, Amelia sat at the grand oak desk, her shoulders slumped forward. The sketchbook she carried everywhere lay open before her, but her pencil rested limply in her hand. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. At first, Ethan thought she had fallen asleep, but then he realized she was not moving at all. He rushed inside, his chair scraping loudly across the floor as he pulled it close to her. "Amelia," he said sharply, his voice more urgent than he intended. "Wake up!" Her eyelids fluttered, but her body remained weak. She had fainted. Panic gripped him in a way no hostile takeover or failing deal ever had. Without thinking, he scooped her into his arms and carried her up the staircase to her room. The storm pounded harder outside as he laid her gently on the bed. He called for the house doctor immediately, his usually calm voice trembling as he barked orders at the staff. Minutes later, the doctor arrived, examined her, and shook his head with quiet disapproval. "She has been overworking herself," the doctor said. "Not eating enough, not resting enough. Stress like this can wear anyone down. She needs proper care." Ethan stood in silence as the words sank in. Guilt gnawed at him. How had he not noticed? She had been carrying herself with dignity through endless whispers, cruelty, and isolation. And he, who shared her roof, had turned a blind eye. That night, after the doctor left, Ethan stayed by her bedside. He poured a glass of water, placed it on the table, and adjusted the blanket over her fragile frame. His hand lingered for a moment, almost brushing her cheek, before he pulled it back. He had never allowed himself to look closely before, but now, in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, he noticed details he had ignored: the way her lashes curled against her skin, the faint crease of worry between her brows, the quiet strength even in her exhaustion. Hours later, Amelia stirred awake. Her eyes blinked open, meeting his. For a moment, she seemed confused to find him there. "You should rest," he said softly, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "The doctor said you need more care." She tried to sit up, but he pressed a hand lightly against her shoulder. "Do not push yourself. Stay still." There was silence between them, broken only by the rain against the windows. Finally, she whispered, "I am sorry. I did not mean to be a burden." The words hit him like a blade. A burden? That was how she saw herself? He clenched his jaw, unable to answer immediately. For the first time, he realized how invisible he had made her feel. As she drifted back to sleep, Ethan's eyes fell upon the sketchbook lying on the nightstand. Curiosity overcame him. He opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. His breath caught. Inside were drawings of breathtaking beauty landscapes alive with color and movement, portraits filled with depth and emotion. But what stunned him most were the sketches of people. He saw his parents, rendered with sharp precision, their stern expressions softened by Amelia's pencil. He saw the staff, captured with warmth and detail. And then, on one page, he saw himself. It was a sketch of Ethan sitting at the breakfast table, his head bent over papers. Yet in her drawing, he looked different. He looked tired, guarded, but human. She had seen through his armor and captured a side of him even he barely acknowledged. Closing the sketchbook, he sat back in silence. The woman he had dismissed as plain and unworthy carried a world of beauty inside her. And for the first time since their marriage began, Ethan Donovan felt something shift within his carefully built walls. Winter arrived, and with it came the Donovan family's annual gala, an event that drew the wealthiest figures in the city. The mansion's ballroom was draped in gold and crystal, the air filled with the hum of violins and the clinking of champagne glasses. For Ethan, the gala was just another stage to maintain his image. For Amelia, it was yet another battlefield. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, her gown modest compared to the glittering dresses of other women. Whispers began almost immediately, just as they always did. "Look at her dress," someone sneered. "She looks like she came from a thrift store," another voice joined, sharper. The Donovan heir could have had any woman. Why her? Amelia's cheeks flushed. But she kept her chin lifted, reminding herself that dignity was her armor. She refused to let them see her break. She clutched her small clutch purse tightly, her knuckles white against the satin. Across the room, Ethan heard every word. For weeks, Amelia's fainting spell and the discovery of her sketchbook had haunted him. He had begun to notice details he once ignored: the quiet grace with which she carried herself, the way she endured cruelty without lashing back, the way her art revealed a depth no one else cared to see. Tonight, as he watched the crowd circle her like vultures, something inside him snapped. He crossed the ballroom, his stride purposeful. The whispers faltered as he stopped beside Amelia, placing a hand firmly at the small of her back. She stiffened in surprise, but before she could speak, his voice rang out, low and commanding enough for the entire circle to hear. "Is there a problem here?" The women who had been mocking her froze, their painted smiles faltering. One of them laughed nervously. "Oh, we were just talking about how unusual your wife's style, island." Ethan's eyes turned to steel. "Then allow me to make something clear. This woman," he said, drawing Amelia closer to his side, "is my wife, and she deserves the same respect you claim for yourselves. If you cannot manage that, then you do not belong here." The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amelia's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Never before had he defended her. Not like this. Not so publicly. One of the older men at the gathering attempted to change the subject, raising his glass awkwardly. "Well, the Donovans certainly know how to keep us entertained," he muttered. But the sting of Ethan's words lingered. For the rest of the evening, Ethan stayed by Amelia's side, his presence a shield. He introduced her to business partners, guiding her through conversations she once faced alone. Though his expression remained composed, his actions spoke volumes. To everyone watching, it was a declaration. She was not an outsider to be mocked. She was his wife. And he would not tolerate disrespect. Amelia, still stunned, could barely find her voice. When she finally whispered, "You did not have to do that," his reply was steady. "Yes, I did." Those 3 words carried more weight than any promise of wealth. Later, as they returned home, the silence between them was different. Not cold, not hostile, but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ethan walked her to her room, something he had never done before. At the door, he paused. "I heard what they said about you," he admitted, "and I should have defended you sooner. You did not deserve that." Amelia searched his face, looking for mockery or obligation, but found neither. Instead, she saw sincerity. Her throat tightened, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." "Oh." He nodded once, almost curtly, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed something deeper. That night, as Amelia opened her sketchbook and drew the chandelier from the gala, her hand shook not from sadness, but from something unfamiliar. Hope. And in his study, Ethan poured himself a drink, but this time the bourbon did not numb him. Instead, he replayed the look in her eyes when he defended her, a look that made him wonder if the contract that bound them was not the only force keeping them together anymore. In the days following the gala, something changed inside the Donovan mansion. Amelia noticed it first in small, almost imperceptible ways. Ethan no longer avoided her at breakfast. He asked if she wanted tea instead of coffee, or whether she preferred the curtains drawn to let in more light. They were simple gestures, but to her, they felt like cracks in the wall he had built between them. For Ethan, the shift was harder to admit. The image of Amelia standing in that ballroom, holding her head high while people mocked her, replayed in his mind again and again. He had stepped in to defend her almost instinctively, not out of duty, but out of something deeper. Now, he could not ignore the gnawing realization. The woman he had married under contract was not the weak figure he once assumed. She was stronger, braver, and far more complex than anyone gave her credit for, including himself. One late afternoon, he returned home earlier than usual. The mansion was quiet, the staff gone about their duties. Passing the garden, he caught sight of Amelia seated on a stone bench, her sketchbook balanced on her lap. Her pencil moved quickly, her brow furrowed in concentration. He lingered, unseen, watching the strokes form across the page. When curiosity overcame him, he approached. Amelia startled slightly when she noticed him, instinctively closing the sketchbook. "You do not need to hide it," Ethan said, his tone softer than usual. "I have seen some of your work before." Her eyes widened. "You? Saw it?" He nodded. "The night you fainted. I found your sketchbook in your room. I should not have looked, but I did." He hesitated, searching for words. "You are talented. More than talented. Your drawings are extraordinary." For a moment, silence hung between them. Amelia's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She had spent years hiding that part of herself, afraid of ridicule, afraid that no one would value something so personal. Hearing it from him, the man who once dismissed her entirely, was like hearing truth spoken aloud for the first time. "I draw because it is the only place I feel free," she finally whispered. "In those pages, no one calls me ugly. No one reminds me of what I am not. It is just me, and the world the way I see it." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Ugly. The word echoed in his mind, a word he had once thoughtlessly believed. Yet here she was, creating beauty far greater than any diamond necklace or couture gown paraded in their social circles. Later that night, he found himself standing in front of the fireplace in his study, Amelia's words lingering. He thought about her sacrifice, marrying him not for wealth or ambition, but to save her family. He remembered the harsh way his mother treated her, the cruel laughter of their guests. And through it all, Amelia never broke. She endured with dignity, creating beauty in secret while the world dismissed her. The realization unsettled him. He had been blind to her strength, blind to her heart, blind to the quiet resilience that now seemed impossible to ignore. The next morning, he asked her to join him for breakfast, something he had never done before. When she looked at him with surprise, he offered a small, almost awkward smile. "I thought we might actually eat together today." It was not much, but it was a beginning. Amelia sat across from him, her sketchbook tucked discreetly under her arm as though it were her shield. But this time, she let it rest on the table between them, Ethan noticed. And for the first time, he reached out not with words of dismissal, but with a quiet acknowledgement that he wanted to know her, truly know her. The contract still bound them on paper, but in the hidden moments of breakfast tables and garden benches, something else was being written, something no legal document could capture. Peace in the Donovan mansion did not last. For a brief time, Amelia felt the air grow lighter, as if her presence was no longer an unwelcome shadow. Ethan's small gestures sharing breakfast, walking with her in the garden, gave her a fragile hope. But that hope shattered one evening, when the family gathered in the grand dining hall. Ethan's mother, sharp as ever, had grown impatient. She had noticed his shift in behavior, the softening of his gaze whenever Amelia was near, and she would not allow it. With guests seated around the long table, she struck her blow. "I think it is time the truth came out," she announced, her voice cutting through the clatter of silverware. Her eyes gleamed as she produced a folded document and laid it in the center of the table. "This so-called marriage is nothing more than a contract." Gasps erupted from the guests. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the papers instantly, the agreement she and Ethan had signed. Ethan's jaw clenched, fury flashing in his eyes, but his mother pressed on. 1 year together, no emotional ties, no claim to the Donovan fortune. A sham marriage, nothing more. "Tell me, Amelia, how much are you being paid to play this role?" The words sliced through Amelia's chest. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but the whispers around the table drowned her out. So it was true. I knew she could not belong here. Ugly and fake, what a disgrace. Ethan rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His voice thundered across the hall. "Enough!" But Amelia could not bear it. Humiliation crashed over her like a tidal wave. Before he could reach her, she pushed back her chair and fled the room, tears burning in her eyes. Running through the vast halls, Amelia felt the walls closing in. Everything she had endured, the whispers, the cruelty, the loneliness had been laid bare for all to mock. The contract she had accepted out of sacrifice was now a weapon against her dignity. Behind her, Ethan called her name, but she did not stop. She could not. For the first time, Amelia no longer feared being called ugly. What cut deepest was believing, even for a moment, that Ethan had never truly seen her beyond the contract, that perhaps all his recent kindness had been nothing more than part of the arrangement. That night, the Donovan estate was divided in silence. Amelia shut herself away in her room, her sketchbook pressed against her chest like a shield. And Ethan, standing outside her locked door, realized he was at a crossroads. He could let her believe the contract was all that bound them. Or he could finally do what he had never dared before, tear down the walls, expose his heart, and prove that his feelings had become something no contract could contain. The following morning, the Donovan estate buzzed with scandal. Newspapers had already caught wind of the contract, thanks to whispers from last night's guests. Headlines questioned the legitimacy of the marriage, calling Amelia nothing more than a hired bride. Photographers gathered outside the gates, their flashes ready to capture every ounce of humiliation. Inside her room, Amelia sat by the window clutching her sketchbook. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but her expression was calm, almost resigned. She had endured years of whispers about her looks, but this public humiliation was something else entirely. The world now knew her marriage was nothing more than paper. Whatever fragile hope she had nurtured about Ethan had been crushed. Meanwhile, Ethan stood in his study, staring at the morning papers spread across his desk. The headline mocked him as much as it mocked her. He could almost hear his mother's voice, sharp and satisfied, declaring victory. But instead of shame, a different fire burned in him. He thought of Amelia's pale face as she fled the dining room, the way she held her dignity, even as others tore it apart. For the first time, Ethan realized that silence would be the greatest betrayal of all. That evening, when reporters gathered at the Donovan estate demanding answers, Ethan made a decision. He summoned Amelia, who reluctantly agreed to stand beside him. She appeared in a simple dress, her eyes downcast, clearly expecting more humiliation. But when they stepped outside, Ethan did something that stunned everyone. He held Amelia's hand, not loosely, not formally, but firmly, as though he had no intention of letting go. The cameras flashed wildly, voices shouted, but Ethan's gaze never wavered from hers. "Yes, there was a contract," Ethan declared, his voice carrying over the crowd. Gasps erupted. "But the truth is, that contract no longer matters. What began as an arrangement has become something real, something far beyond what paper can dictate." He turned to Amelia. His words meant as much for her as for the world. "You are not my wife because of an agreement. You are my wife because I have come to love you, and I will not let anyone, family, society, or the press demean you again." For a moment, silence blanketed the scene. Then the questions erupted. "Do you mean to say this marriage is real? Are you admitting you love her?" Ethan pulled Amelia closer, his arm circling her shoulders. "Yes, I love her, and if anyone doubts her worth, let them look at me and see the truth. She is the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I will never let her stand alone again." Amelia's heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. She had prepared herself for more humiliation, but instead, Ethan had given her something she never expected: recognition, respect, and love, declared openly. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not born of sorrow. The reporters captured every second, their lenses recording a moment no contract could define. Behind them, Ethan's mother watched from the mansion window, her face pale with fury. Her plan to disgrace Amelia had backfired spectacularly. As the crowd erupted with questions, Ethan leaned down and whispered only for Amelia to hear. "I should have told you sooner. But I am telling you now. You are everything." Amelia closed her eyes, gripping his hand tightly. For the first time since their wedding, she felt the weight lift from her chest. She was no longer the ugly bride mocked in whispers. She was his partner, his choice, his love revealed not in secrecy, but before the entire world. In the days that followed Ethan's public declaration, the scandal that once threatened to destroy Amelia turned into something else entirely. Newspapers that had mocked her now printed photographs of Ethan holding her hand, his expression fierce and unwavering. Headlines shifted from "contract marriage scandal" to "Millionaire defends wife with powerful declaration of love." The same voices that had whispered insults at the gala now stumbled over themselves to rewrite the narrative. Socialites who once sneered at Amelia tried to extend invitations, pretending they had always respected her. But Amelia remembered every word, every mocking glance. She did not need their approval. She finally had something far greater, her dignity restored, and a love she could trust. Ethan, true to his word, did not let her stand alone again. He shielded her from the press when their questions became too invasive. He stood beside her at business functions, not as if she were a burden, but as though she were his equal. Every gesture, every glance, carried the weight of his choice. He had chosen her, not because of family, not because of obligation, but because his heart demanded it. The biggest shift, however, came inside the Donovan household. Ethan's mother, once the loudest critic, found her influence diminishing. At first, she tried to undermine Amelia quietly, but Ethan confronted her directly. "This is my wife," he told her firmly. "If you cannot respect her, then you do not respect me. And if you cannot respect either of us, then this house is no longer yours to command." The words shook the very foundations of the Donovan family dynamic. His mother, stunned into silence, could no longer challenge him. Justice had finally been served, not through cruelty or revenge, but through unwavering truth. Amelia, though vindicated, did not gloat. She remained the same, gracious, kind, and composed. But her quiet strength was no longer overlooked. People began to see her not as the ugly bride, but as a woman who carried herself with dignity despite every cruelty thrown her way. One evening, weeks later, Ethan found her in the library, the very room where she had once fainted from exhaustion. She was sketching again, the soft sound of her pencil filling the air. He watched her for a moment before stepping closer. "You never stop creating," he said, his voice gentle. She smiled faintly without looking up. "It is who I am." He reached for the sketchbook, and this time, she let him take it. As he flipped through the pages, he saw not just art but pieces of her soul, her fears, her dreams, her resilience. One sketch caught his breath, a portrait of the two of them, standing side by side, not distant but close, their expressions softened by something unmistakable: love. Closing the book, Ethan looked at her with a sincerity she had never seen so openly before. "You once told me that in your sketches, no one calls you ugly. No one tells you what you are not. But I need you to know something, Amelia. To me, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever known. Not because of these drawings, not because of how the world sees you, but because of your heart, your strength, and the way you have changed me." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time she did not look away. "Do you mean that?" He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I mean every word. You are not my contract, Amelia. You are my forever." In that quiet library, surrounded by her sketches, Ethan kissed her not as an obligation, not as a performance for the world, but as a man who had finally surrendered to love. Their story had begun as a lie, a cold contract signed in ink. But it ended in truth, written not on paper, but in every action, every sacrifice, and every promise kept. And so, the millionaire who thought he was wedding an ugly woman found himself stunned not by her looks, but by her soul. And in choosing her, he found the one thing money could never buy: a love that was real, a love that was just, and a love that would last.